Okay, tonight we have a passage that concentrates on punctuation and grammar and sentence structure. And then we have a long passage that concentrates on reading comprehension. And then we have a vocabulary list that we're going to review along with some etymology. So let's begin. A poetic Olympics. During athletic festivals in ancient Greece, great poets were placed alongside champion athletes. So let's look at question 46. Which choice most clearly emphasizes the overwhelmingly positive reception great poets enjoyed during athletic festivals in ancient Greece? So if you look at these choices, we have placed, which is no change, celebrated, accepted, and liked. The most positive, okay, overwhelmingly positive, is celebrate. So the way this should read is during athletic festivals in ancient Greece, great poets were celebrated alongside champion athletes. This has never been true of the modern Olympic Games. The Olympic literary competition, reintroduced in 1912 in Stockholm and included in the Games for decades, is poorly remembered and rarely missed. That choice, poorly remembered and rarely missed, is the no change choice right here. Given that all the choices are accurate, which one best connects this sentence to the information that follows in the next sentence? The only genuine public excitement for even the very first modern Olympic literary contest was focused on the scandal surrounding the winning poem. So the follow-up sentence basically says nobody's interested in this literary contest. So if we look at these choices, we want to know which one of these indicates that nobody is interested. Well, poorly remembered and rarely missed certainly indicates that. Was featured along with competitions in music doesn't indicate that no one's interested. Is sometimes commented upon when the Olympic Games are held today. That doesn't indicate no one is interested. Was an homage to the traditions of the people of ancient Greece. Again, doesn't indicate no one's interested. So the only one that really indicates that no one is interested, which is what the follow-up sentence says, is the no change option. Poorly remembered and rarely missed. The only genuine public excitement for even the very first modern Olympic literary contest. Now, there's a comma here, okay? Very first modern comma Olympic literary contest. The question is, what should the punctuation be in this expression? Very comma, first comma? No, absolutely not. Very first comma, modern Olympic comma? No. Very first modern Olympic, aha. So here's the deal. If an adjective stands alone, okay, and it describes something different from another adjective, then you can separate it, okay? But when all of the descriptors are leading up to a specific game or a specific object, so take a look at this, the very first modern Olympic literary contest. All of these things are specifying a single contest. Without any one of them, you wouldn't know what contest it is. So you don't need any commas separating these adjectives. All of it goes together to focus you on a specific contest. So the only right answer to 48 is J, no commas at all. Okay, so let's read it. The only genuine public excitement for even the very first modern Olympic literary contest was focused on the scandal surrounding the winning poem. So what was the scandal? Well, we're going to find out. The French aristocrat Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who in 1896 founded the modern Olympic Games. Now, this phrase, who in 1896 founded the modern Olympic Games, is separated by commas. And that's absolutely correct to do that, okay? Because basically you're describing who this guy is. And now you're saying he, so you're using another subject, but you've already said Baron Pierre, so you don't need this pronoun. So the only thing you really need is insisted, okay? So insisted is the correct verb form. So for 49, D has to be the right answer. And if I reread this, French aristocrat Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who in 1896 founded the modern Olympic Games, insisted that talent in the fine arts was as important as skill in athletics. Okay, so that sentence makes perfect sense. After years of opposition from officials, whom felt that the modern game should focus solely on athletics. What's the difference between who and whom? Who is a subject, whom is an object? In this case, who describes a subject, who felt, subject, verb. Whom would be an object, like you would say he spoke to whom. So you might have a sentence, who spoke to whom? Who being the subject and whom being the object. So in this case, the object form is incorrect. It has to be the subject form, which is who. After years of opposition from officials who felt that the modern game should focus solely on athletics, Coubertin implemented fine arts competitions. Okay, so the right answer to 50 has to be H, who. Known as the Pentathlon of Muses in 1912. Okay, so this, of course, is separated off by commas. Art competitions known as the Pentathlon of Muses separated by commas in 1912. Good. Okay, so we move on to 51. For the literary contest, it would submit an unpublished work. Now, this is a little more complicated. What they're asking you here is, given that all the choices are accurate, which one provides information about the Olympic literary contest that is most clearly relevant at this point in the essay? Well, you really want to see here a continuation of an idea. And if you look at the next sentence, after a long deliberation during the literary event's first year, judges named duo George Hurad and Martin Esbach as gold medalists for their poem Ode to Sport. So a poem won the contest, and it was basically talking about the glory of sports. So when you go back and look at this, he did not establish a length requirement. Well, that's a very non-specific statement, okay? But if you go over here and you look at the choices, at the Olympic Games in Paris, 1924, a poem about fencing. That doesn't give you a whole lot of information about what kind of artistic works they're looking for. Though critics mocked some of the limitations, and that, again, is very non-specific. But look at this one, preferably a poem that was, quote, inspired by the idea of sport. Well, if you put that in here, basically what won was a poem that was an ode to sport. So that would make the most sense in the full context of this paragraph. So how this would read is, for the literary contest, it would submit an unpublished work, preferably a poem that was inspired by the idea of sport. Okay, then it goes on and say, after a long deliberation during the literary event's first year, judges named these two guys as gold medalists for their poem, Ode to Sport. So that follows directly. So the right answer to 52 should be J. Okay. Now let's, what's that?
You didn't do number 51.
Oh, okay, yeah. For the literary contest, who would submit an unpublished work? It refers to an object. Okay. So what we need is a person or persons. So for the literary contest, competitors, those, or they. Well, we want something that's plural because there's more than one person submitting, and something that's specific, which is people entering the contest who are competitors. So the right answer to 51 would be B, competitors. For the literary contest, competitors would submit an unpublished work. And then, of course, we talked about 52, which would be J. Now, 53 is very simple. After a long deliberation during the literary event's first year, judges named the duo George Hurad and Martin Esbach as gold medalists. Do you really need to put the word finally in there? No, you do not, because you wrote here, after a long deliberation during the literary event's first year, judges named the duo, okay? Right here, comma. After a long deliberation, which is a prepositional phrase, judges named duo George Harrod and Martin Eschbach as gold medalists for their poem Ode to Sport. Okay, so the right answer for 53 would be B. Judges, comma, not a period, a comma, and then judges. Okay, so 53 is B. And we'll move on here. The judges, comma, so impressed by Ode to Sport that they called it the perfect poem, comma, refused to award either silver or bronze medals to any other literary competitors. So in this sentence, you're basically saying, you're basically describing the judges, right? But here's the deal. The verb is refused. This is a dependent clause describing how the judges were feeling, but the verb is refused. And here's the thing. When you look at the other choices for 54, they all have verbs in them. Having been, had been, were. You can't have verbs in this dependent clause and then have another verb. It doesn't make any sense. So really, the only thing that makes sense is the dependent clause that's a descriptor that doesn't have the verb in it, the active verb, which is refused. So the right answer to 54 would be no change. And let's see how it reads. The judges, comma, so impressed by the Ode to Sport that they called it the perfect poem, comma, refused to award either silver or bronze medals to any other literary competitors, period. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now, this phrase, weeks after the games had come to an end, should there be a comma here? Or should this just be a continuous clause describing when the judges attempted to contact them? This comma doesn't belong here. So what you want is a phrase that's continuous here. Weeks after the games had come to an end. Weeks after the games had come to an end, comma. Weeks, comma, after the games had come to an end. Weeks after the games had come to an end. Okay. You don't want anything in there that will separate this phrase. So no change is clearly wrong because that comma does not belong there, right? You want it to be continuous and followed by a comma. So look at B, all right? Weeks after the games had come to an end, comma. That's correct, okay? This one is wrong because of the comma, and this one is wrong because there's no comma here. So you want the phrase to be continuous, but at the end of the phrase, there should be a comma. So the right answer to 55 should be B. Weeks after the games had come to an end, comma, the judges attempted to contact Horod and Eschbach, given that the two had not come forward to receive their medals, period. The judges discovered that neither author existed. Okay, 56, what would be the right answer here? This is a perfectly good sentence. The judges, plural, discovered, which goes along with that neither author existed. Okay, so as this sentence is structured, it's perfectly normal and it's totally correct, right? But let's look at what the descriptor. Given that all the choices are true, which one most effectively leads the reader from the information about Horod and Eschbach in the preceding sentence to the information about Coubertin in the next sentence? Okay, so they looked for these two guys that won the contest, but they didn't exist. Now, you know, of course, you're like, what? They didn't exist. And then, of course, in the rest of the passage, they're going to explain it. So let's take a look. We have no change as a possible answer. Okay. After Ode to Sport won, Swedish art academies claimed that the contest, with its thematic focus on sports, lacked purpose. This is totally non sequitur. It's completely away from the relevance of this passage. What's interesting is that they looked for them and they couldn't find them because they didn't exist. And that makes sense, but this is just completely coming from left field. Submissions began to arrive in anticipation of the next Olympic. Again, non sequitur, completely in left field. The judges had read the winning poem Ode to Sport aloud to spectators. The storyline is not continued at all by this statement. It comes from left field. So the only one that's really relevant is they were looking for these two dudes, and then they found out they don't exist. And now, so the right answer here is no change. 56 should be no change. Now, the following part of the passage should explain why they did not exist. Aha. A few years later, comma, Coubertin admitted that he himself had submitted, quote, the perfect poem pseudonymously. Pseudonymously means with a fake name. Pseudo means fake and nym is name. So he finally admitted that those two guys never existed. And he actually wrote the poem himself, even though he was the sponsor of the contest. Okay. So that storyline makes sense. The judges looked for the guys, they couldn't find them. And then Coubertin admitted that it was him that he who had submitted it, and that those other two guys didn't actually exist. So 57, at this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. The founder of the modern Olympic Games, Coubertin, was also the person who brought about the fine arts competition. It already says that earlier in the passage. It says both of those things. So it says here, given that the information is true, should the writer make this addition here? Well, it's already been pointed out in the passage, both of these things. So you go right down to no. This does not add anything, it's redundant. No, because it repeats information about Coubertin that is provided earlier in the essay. That's absolutely correct. So 57 should be C. Okay? It's a very straightforward answer. If you go back and look early in the passage, basically all of this was already stated very clearly. So it's just redundant. So C is the right answer to 57. Okay, 58. The judges argued that they did not know that Coubertin had written Ode to Sport. But once Coubertin's ruse, means his attempt to fool everyone, was uncovered, comma, distrust for the already unpopular competition expanded. Now, here's the thing. You don't need as a result because it's redundant. Once Coubertin's ruse was uncovered, okay, that basically sets up that the following conclusion that the unpopular competition expanded, okay? Distrust expanded. You don't need as a result because you already have set it up. Once Coubertin's ruse was uncovered, distrust expanded. So the right answer to 58 should not be no change. So let's take a look. Increased, even though dislike of it was not new, again, redundant. Grew, simple, clean, and correct. Blew up because of this unveiling. See, all of this stuff is redundant. The only thing you need is grew. So if you read the sentence, but once Coubertin's ruse was uncovered, comma, distrust for the already unpopular competition grew. Here's the dash, and the feeling endured. So basically, this art competition was going to go downhill. Nobody really wanted it. Plus, it was mired in scandal and distrust arose, and people didn't really want it. So if we go to 59 now, okay, let's take a look here. The literary competition was dropped after the 1948 London Games. Many of the winning poems have since vanished, with only their titles remaining. Few literary historians think that much has been lost. So basically, this thing disappeared into historical oblivion, and nobody really cared. And so the modern Olympic Games had this for a period of maybe 2 or 3 decades, and then it just disappeared. And since then, we haven't had any literary competition. So the storyline is basically that the literary thing was short-lived, it was mired in scandal, and it became so unpopular that it disappeared. So let's take a look at 59. The writer is considering adding the following sentence to the essay. Over the years, the contest attracted many people who wanted to be poets, but few talented poets. And even contest organizers began to doubt the quality of the submissions. So this would be very, very appropriate right here. Because the story is, it was already unpopular. People lost trust in it, which basically was an enduring feeling. It lasted for a few years, but it never really got any good poems. And even the organizers felt that the submissions weren't good. So as a result of this deterioration, which we could put right in there, the literary competition was dropped. So the right answer to 59 should be D. Point D in paragraph 4, because it just fits perfectly right in there. Okay, and then we'll move on to 60. Suppose the writer's primary purpose had been to explain a lesser known aspect of a widely known event. The lesser known aspect being the literary contest, the widely known event being the Olympics. Would this essay accomplish that purpose? Yes, it would, because it describes to you something that you probably didn't know, that there had been a literary contest as part of the Olympic Games, something I didn't know either. So we already know that the answer is yes. But let's stick to the choices. Yes, because it outlines Coubertin's most important accomplishments as the founder of the modern Olympic Games. Well, how important was it if it was scratched? Not very important. So let's look at G. Yes, because it describes an element of the modern Olympic Games that was relatively short-lived and is not very well remembered. There it is, right? It basically petered out, and for the last 70 years, no one's even thought about it. So the right answer to 60 is G. Okay, good. So we got through that. Now what we're going to do is read this essay on natural science and then try to answer the questions that are relevant to this particular essay. This passage is adapted from Free Radicals by Michael Brooks. As the 20th century began, Robert Millikan was fast approaching 40. All around him, physics was at its most exhilarating, yet Millikan had done practically nothing. So he decided to measure E, the charge on the electron. Millikan's idea was simple. A droplet of water that had been given an electric charge would be attracted to a metal plate which carried an opposite charge. He arranged his apparatus so that the electrical attraction pulled the droplet up while gravity pulled it down. This gave him a way to measure E. First, he would find the mass of the droplet. Then he would measure the voltage needed for the attraction to the metal plate to cancel out the downward pull of gravity. From those two pieces of information, he could get a measure of the charge on the droplet. So you multiply the charge by the mass, and basically the amount of voltage required versus the strength of gravity, and you make an equation. You can figure out what the charge on individual molecules would be. Okay, so the experiment was far from simple to carry out, however, finding that the water droplet tended to evaporate before any measurements could be made. Millikan set to the task of trying the same trick with oil droplets. In 1910, at the age of 42, he finally published a value for E. It was meant to be his career-defining publication. Eventually, it was. But Millikan still had years of difficult and dirty work ahead of him. The Austrian physicist Felix Ehrenhaft refuted Millikan's results with a similar set of experiments that seemed to show that electrical charge can be infinitely small. There is no fundamental minimum unit of charge, Ehrenhaft said. There is no electron. The series of experiments that desperate Millikan then performed were to cast a lasting shadow over his scientific integrity. So this is where the questionable behavior comes in. According to biologist Richard Lewontin, Millikan, quote, went out of his way to hide the existence of inconvenient data, close quote. David Goodstein, a physics professor, says Millikan, quote, certainly did not commit scientific fraud. So where does the truth lie? So these experts looking at his behavior, one said, he was a little sketchy by selecting data that he wanted. The other one says, well, no, he didn't commit any fraud at all. The debate hangs on a phrase in Millikan's 1913 paper, refuting Ehrenhaft and showing that every measurement of electrical charge gives a value of E or an integer multiple of E. In his 1913 paper, Millikan says that his data table, this is italicized, contains a complete summary of the results obtained on all of the 58 different drops upon which complete series of observations were made. The statement is written in italics as if to give it special weight. The notebooks for the 1913 paper show that Millikan actually took data on 100 oil droplets. Did Millikan cherry pick the data in order to confirm his original result and crush Ehrenhoft underfoot? So he did 100 measurements, 100 different droplets, but only reported 58. And the reason he only reported 58 was he claimed those were the only 58 that had complete measurements. He certainly had motive. In Millikan's 1910 paper, he had made the mistake of full disclosure with statements such as, quote, although all of these observations gave values of E within 2% of the final mean, the uncertainties of the observations were such that I felt obliged to discard them. This admirable honesty about the selection of data points had given Ehrenhoft ammunition that he used enthusiastically in his long feud with Millikan. Perhaps with the italicized statement, Millikan was making sure that he gave his foe no more ammunition. So he was trying to explain why he selected those 58 droplets. Okay. That would certainly explain something that is otherwise inexplicable. Millikan aborted the experimental run on 25 of the droplets in the work reported in 1913 paper. According to Goodstein, Millikan preferred to use droplets that showed a change in charge, gaining or losing an electron as he saw it during the measurement. Millikan may also have judged some droplets to be too small or too large to yield reliable data, Goodstein says. If they were too large, they would fall too rapidly to be reliably observed. Too small and their fall, and thus the charge result, will be affected by random collisions with air molecules. Goodstein interprets the italicized statement as an assertion that there were only 58 complete enough sets of data. So Goodstein is trying to justify what Millikan did. But Goodstein undoes his defense by stating that in order to make the too large or too small distinction, all the data would need to have been taken in the first place. So if he had all the data, why did he only report on 58? That's the question. Millikan certainly did not convince his peers straight away. The arguments with Ehrenhoft rumbled on long enough for Millikan's Nobel Prize to be delayed for 3 years. It did eventually come in 1923. But here's the point. Millikan was right about the electron and its charge. Few laboratories managed to replicate Ehrenhoft's results, but students now replicate Millikan's results all across the world. No one now believes that the fundamental unit of charge is anything other than Millikan's E, or electron. To get his Nobel Prize, Millikan had to play hard and fast with what we might call accepted practice. So he was kind of walking the line between good science and bad science. And the truth is, I could see where the criticism would come in, because one of the greatest crimes in the world is to do experiments and only report on certain ones that you like and others that you don't like. But you could also make the argument that he had complete data for the 58 drops he reported on, and the other drops he didn't have complete data, so he discounted them. That's a reasonable argument as well. So who knows? But basically, again, this was very controversial. A lot of people felt the science wasn't good. And even in the long run, it turns out that Millikan was correct. At the time, there certainly were objections that were reasonable objections to the work that he did. Okay. The main purpose of the passage is to use the example of Millikan to show A, how a theory becomes accepted, B, that some well-accepted scientific ideas have a sullied past, meaning a cloudy or not completely clean past. C, the challenges scientists faced in measuring E. D, that some scientists get credit for work that is not their own. So really, when you really look at this passage, it's trying to show you that Millikan, his work was questioned, and that there was kind of a cloud hanging over him for the techniques that he used. So I would say that the best answer to 31 would be B. Some well-accepted scientific ideas, like the charge on the electron, have a sullied past, meaning that they were mired in certain controversies and there were objections to the honesty of the work. Okay, so 31, I would say B. 32, based on the passage, the debate between Millikan and Ehrenhoff is best described as tense. Their professional reputations were at stake. Well, that's definitely true. Unprofessional, they sabotaged each other's experiments, doesn't say that. Collegial, each wanted to push the other to create a stronger theory. No, they weren't collegial, they were fighting with each other. J, indirect, although their work intersected along some lines, they were primarily working in different fields. That's not true. They were basically doing the same experiment. So the only right answer here is F, tense. They clearly did not like each other. They were battling to see who was going to win the contest. 33, the passage indicates that the debate regarding Millikan's integrity centers on A, others' ability to replicate the results of Ehrenhoff's experiments more readily than those of Millikan. No, the reverse is true. They were able to replicate Millikan. B, Millikan's decision to switch from using water to oil. No, that wasn't really an issue. C, certain statements Millikan made about the apparatus he used in his experiments. No. D, a discrepancy between data in Millikan's 1913 paper and information in his notebooks. Yep. He reported only some of what was in his notebook. So the right answer to 33 should be D. 34. It can reasonably be inferred that the passage author considers Millikan's decision to offer full disclosure in his 1910 paper, the earlier paper where he says the measurements were not precise, an understandable mistake that most scientists rightfully avoid, an admirable choice with an unfortunate consequence, a strategic decision that paid off in the end, a naive decision revealing desperation. So an admirable choice with unfortunate consequences. If you go back and look at the passage, although all of these observations gave values within 2%, the uncertainties of the observations were such that I felt obliged to discard them. This admirable honesty had given Ehrenhoff ammunition that he used against Millikan's, which was unfortunate. Okay, so basically the right answer here should be an admirable choice with an unfortunate consequence, G. 35, the passage indicates that in his experiment to measure E, Millikan switched from water to oil droplets because he couldn't get good measurements on the water, right? Other physicists have found that oil droplets were easier. No, it doesn't say that. With oil, he found it easier to form droplets with little variation in size. No, he had to vary the size in order to figure out the charge. C, oil droplets allowed him to take accurate measurements more consistently. Yeah, that's correct, because they didn't evaporate. Oil droplets could be reused. It doesn't say that. So C is the only right answer to 35. Okay, now we move on to 36. In the passage, the primary purpose of the 9th paragraph is to, well, this is all about Goodstein, 62 through 76, right here. Basically, according to Goodstein, Millikan preferred to use droplets that showed a change in charge. Said some droplets be too small or too large, Goodstein says, and he explains what that means. Goodstein interprets the italicized statement as an assertion that there were only 58 complete. So this is Goodstein basically defending Millikan's work. So there you go. Present Goodstein's defense of Millikan's choices, right? Regarding the data reported in Millikan's 1913 paper. That's pretty much what the paragraph does. Argue against Goodstein's interpretation? No, it's telling you what Goodstein says. Summarize the current prevailing view? No, it's not about the current prevailing view. Offer an overview of Millikan's explanation? No, it's really all about what Goodstein is saying about Millikan, which is basically to defend him. So 36 is F. 37, the passage indicates that Ehrenhoff's experiments led him to make which of the following assertions in refuting the claims in Millikan's 1910 paper? Well, he said that the charges could be infinitely small, and therefore there was no such thing as an electron or a unit of charge. So the right answer is A, there is no electron. That's what he was saying. That's what Ehrenhoff was saying, to refute Millikan. Okay. 38, based on the passage, the author's assertion that Millikan's experiments, quote, were to cast a lasting shadow over his scientific integrity, close quote, is best described as an opinion based on casual assumptions about scientists? No. An opinion based on the passage author's efforts to imagine himself as Millikan? No. A reasoned judgment based on consideration of the debate sparked by these experiments? Yeah. After he reviews what happened between Millikan and Ehrenhoft and how Millikan tried to defend himself and the techniques that he used to defend himself, the author of the passage is in a reasoned judgment is basically saying that there was a shadow cast over Millikan, and that's correct. So H is good. A fact that Millikan clearly explains it. No, there's no fact there. It's a judgment. Okay, 39. The passage author references Lewontin and Goodstein, two prominent scientists, in the 6th paragraph, in order to identify two leading arguments about Millikan's methodology. Yeah, one said that he was cherry picking the results. The other one said that what he did was legitimate, because it was he needed complete measurements, right? So two different arguments. Explain how a scientist's background might influence his or her opinion. Well, you don't really know the background of these scientists. Emphasize that current experiments in the electron contradict Millikan. No, in fact, they confirm Millikan. Highlight the difficulty Millikan contemporaries had in replicating Millikan's experiments. No, it basically they were able to replicate, and even up to this day we can. So they basically to identify two leading arguments. One saying that he was not doing good science, the other one saying he was doing perfectly good science. Okay, 40. As it is used in line 39, the phrase hangs on most nearly means, okay, so we'll just go back to line 39. The debate about whether he was doing good science hangs on a phrase in Millikan's 1913 paper refuting Aharonov, showing that every measurement of electric charge gives a value of E or an integer multiple of E, okay? So hangs on really means depends on or is dependent upon, and continues, depends on, sticks with, blames on. So it depends on, hangs on, depends on. Okay, so 40G is the correct answer. Okay, so we're going to stop here, and then we're going to move on to the vocabulary section, which I hope you already looked these words up. Okay, so our first word of the night is exhilarate. So what does it mean, the word exhilarate, Abby?
Excitement.
Yeah, it's a verb, right? Exhilaration is excitement, but when you exhilarate someone or you find something exhilarating, it's to induce a feeling of excitement, to induce a feeling of happiness or elation. Okay, so exhilarate being the verb and exhilaration being the noun. Excellent. Consign. Now the G is silent there. Consign. What does it mean?
To assign.
Yeah, to consign something is to deliver into someone's custody or to assign something to someone permanently. So have you ever heard of a consignment store? I'll explain this to you. A consignment store, let's say you have a dining room set and you're moving and you don't want to take the dining room set with you. You call a consignment store and you say, I would like to give you this dining room set for you to keep it and try to sell it. And if you do sell it, you give me a percentage of the money that you make. So you're consigning, you're literally offering over your dining room set to a consignment store, and they will be in charge of it from now on, and you might get a little bit of profit back. So the other way you could use this is once the priest had said final rites over the dying person, the person was consigned to God. Basically, we on earth as humans can only do so much, and now we have to basically assign the fate of this person to a higher power. Okay, construe. What does it mean to construe?
To interpret something a particular way.
Yeah, you construe it in a certain way. Someone else might construe it in a different way. It's the way you interpret it, and it can be very specific to the person. And a lot of times, like if you say something to someone and you didn't mean what they think you mean, maybe they get offended because they didn't really understand what you meant. They misconstrued your intention, misinterpreted, or they basically didn't understand what you meant. They interpreted it in a particular way, and that's not the way that you meant it. So they misconstrued it. Okay, good. Contusion. What is a contusion?
A wound that doesn't break skin.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a dull impact wound, but it leaves a bruise. And the reason it leaves a bruise is because it breaks the capillaries in the skin, and they bleed a little bit, and it forms like a purple bruise. So that a contusion, when you think of a contusion, it's not a laceration, it's not a cut in the skin. It's a dull impact, blunt trauma that results in basically a black and blue mark from bleeding capillaries. Okay. Contrite. What does it mean to be contrite?
Remorseful or guilty.
Yeah, you feel bad about doing something. You did something wrong, and you'd say something like, the 17-year-old boy went into the drugstore and stole a bunch of vitamins. And when he got home, he felt contrite. He felt bad about it. He was basically feeling guilty. To be contrite is to kind of feel guilty and kind of wish that you hadn't done it. Okay. Contentious. What does it mean to be contentious?
It causes disagreement.
Yeah, I mean, contentious, causing or likely to cause an argument. Now, here's the thing about contentious. An issue can be contentious, or a discussion can be contentious. So you can say the issue of whether or not to give amnesty to all illegals is a contentious issue. People argue on both sides pretty hotly. Some people say, oh yeah, give all of them, millions of them, free citizenship. And some people go, no, we're not a country unless we have a border. We can't just let anybody come in. We have to let them come in legally. So this would be a very contentious issue. But you could say the two lawmakers were having a heated and contentious argument. So it means like their argument was full of a little bit of anger or animosity, a lot of emotion. Okay, so you can use contentious about an issue or about a particular discussion or argument. Okay, contravene. When you contravene something, what are you doing?
Interfere.
Yeah, you're violating a law or an order or a code or policy or my neighbor contravened the pooper scooper rule by allowing his dog to defecate in the street without cleaning it. Basically, you're basically saying, I'm not going to do that, even though it's a rule or a law or policy. You're contravening it, going against it. Okay. Convivial. What does it mean to be convivial?
To have a friendly atmosphere.
Yeah, friendly, lively, enjoyable, cheerful. And convivial can be a person. Oh, he was very convivial. He was super nice and he made jokes and he was very pleasant to everyone. He made everyone feel good. He was a convivial person. Or you can talk about an event. Oh, the party was so convivial. Everyone had a great time. So you can describe a person or an event as being convivial. And that word can be used either way. Okay, so our two words for etymology tonight. The first one is convivial, which is from Latin. The first part of convivial is con, which means with. In this case, C-O-N, con is with. And vivial comes from vivere, V-I-V-E-R-E, which is Latin to live. With life, with living, with joy, with happiness, convivial. And there is a Latin word called convivium, which is a feast, a celebration, a convivium. So convivial comes straight from that. Now, this root, viv or vivere, can you name another word in modern English that would use this root?
Vicarious.
Oh, interesting. Vicarious. I'm not sure about that. Like to live something through someone else. Yeah, that could definitely be right. Vicarious. Very nice. I'm actually going to write that down. Vicarious. So you're living something through somebody else. What other words can you think of? What is somebody's vivacious? If somebody's vivacious, what does that mean? She's very vivacious. It means that she's full of energy, full of life. Like Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind was very vivacious, full of life, full of energy. Okay, can you think of another word with this root, this viv root, meaning life? How about vitality? She was full of vitality, full of life. So that's another word, vitality. And then there's a word which you probably don't know, which I think you'll be interesting. It's called vivisection. And a vivisection is to do a dissection on a living animal. So for example, if you're in a laboratory and you have let's say a piglet and you want to see how its heart is beating, you can put it to sleep and you can make an incision in the chest and open the chest up and look at the heart. And then after you've made your observation, you close it up and you wake up the baby pig. That's called a vivisection, looking at a living being inside and seeing how it's functioning. Okay, so you have vitality, vicarious, vivisection, and vivacious, all coming from that Latin vivere, life. Okay, our second word of the night is contrite. And contrite again is Latin, again, con, with, but this part right here, trite, is interesting. It comes from the Latin terere, T-E-R-E-R-E, which means to rub. And there is to rub, meaning like when you like take sandpaper, rub it on wood, you're rubbing it down, you're wearing it down. So this word has evolved, right? There was a Latin word, contrarere, which meant to grind something down, like grind metal. Okay? With grinding or with rubbing. Contrarere would be to grind down something. How did this word change to mean feeling guilty? So basically, if you imagine your happiness being ground down because you feel guilty, you feel ashamed of something that you did. And so this word evolved, you can just think of it, that you just got like, you feel so bad, it's just making you feel small because you did something wrong. So you feel ground down. Okay, so that's how the word evolved. Contrite. It started out as basically a verb for grinding something, but now it turns out it's grinding you because you feel ashamed or guilty of what you're doing. Now there are other words that use this root, terere. Can you name any in this form? Trit. In this form, trit, which means to grind. Can you name any other modern English words that would use that root, trit? Have you ever heard of a war of attrition? A war of attrition is two sides that no side can win, but they keep fighting and wearing each other down, grinding each other down. That's a war of attrition. And so eventually somebody just gets ground down so much that they can't fight anymore, and the other side wins. So they call that a war of attrition. Okay. Another way to use the word attrition would be, what's the attrition at the freshman class of Harvard? Attrition meaning how many students are lost the first year, the grinding down of the student body. That's attrition. Okay. Another word that uses this trait is trite. When you say, oh, that is so trite. When somebody makes an expression that is so overused, it's worn out. Everyone's already used it. Everybody already has heard it a million times. So it's trite. It's kind of ground down or worn out. That's so trite. What a trite observation. Okay. You could like a trite observation might be something like when you walk on the beach, you always get sand in your shoes. And of course, that's trite. Everyone knows that. Okay. And another word is detritus. Detritus, D-E-T-R-I-T-U-S. Detritus are the fragments resulting from erosion. So if you have a river rapids going over rock, it starts wearing the rock away. And then when you get down to the end of the river, you see all the silt. All of that, the kind of muddy silt is detritus from the erosion of the rock. So all three of those words, attrition, trite, and detritus, all use this grinding word, T-R-I-T, which comes originally from the Latin verb terrere, which means to grind or to rub. Okay? So those are some good words for you, and basically some good Latin roots and Latin prefixes. And I think we're going to stop here. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad you joined me tonight. It was just you and me, and hopefully the rest of the gang will be with us next week. And the recording will always be available for everybody. All right, Abby, take care of yourself. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.